You bought a dehumidifier, maybe two. You run them all summer. You empty the water tank every single day, and your walls still sweat. Your basement still smells like wet stone, and your windows still fog up every morning like nothing ever changed. Here's something almost nobody tells you. A dehumidifier doesn't fix a moisture problem. It just fights the same battle every single day, forever, using electricity to remove water that keeps coming back from the exact same source it's always come from. My name is Caleb Miller. I'm Amish, 50 years old, Holmes County, Ohio. Same farmhouse my grandfather built with his own hands. We've never owned a dehumidifier. Not one, not ever. And this house sits on the same damp Ohio clay ground as half the houses in this county. The same humid summers, the same wet springs. Yet walk into my cellar in August and it's dry enough to store grain in. Walk into my neighbor's cellar, the one running two dehumidifiers non-stop, and it still smells like a wet basement. The reason isn't that our house is somehow special. It's that my grandmother never once tried to remove moisture from the air after it was already there. She stopped it before it ever got in. There's a difference between those two approaches, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a dehumidifier the same way again. Let me show you where this actually starts, because it's not where you think. Most people believe humidity is an air problem. Too much moisture floating around, so you need a machine to pull it out. That's treating the symptom. The truth is that in the overwhelming majority of houses, moisture is entering from one of three specific points, and every single one of them can be addressed directly, at the source, for almost nothing. My grandfather used to walk the foundation of this house every spring, same as he walked the fence line checking for loose posts, because he understood the foundation the same way he understood everything else on this farm, as something that needed regular attention, not something you fix once and forget about. The first source is groundwater pressure against the foundation itself. Ohio clay holds water like a sponge, and after a heavy rain, that clay pushes moisture directly through stone and mortar joints into a cellar, especially an older one like ours with a fieldstone foundation instead of poured concrete. My grandfather's answer to this wasn't a sealant or a coating, it was grading, the simple slope of the earth around the house. He kept the ground sloping away from the foundation on all four sides, about 1 inch of drop for every foot moving outward for at least 6 feet. Water that lands near the house runs away from it instead of sitting against the stone and working its way in. Most modern houses have lost this grading over decades of landscaping, mulch piling up against the foundation, gardens built right up against the walls. That alone, just re-establishing the slope with a few wheelbarrows of soil, stops more water from entering a cellar than any machine running inside it ever will. The second source, and this one surprises people every time I explain it, is the air itself moving from outside to inside during the hottest, most humid part of the day. Here's the part nobody explains right. Warm air holds far more moisture than cool air. When that warm, humid outside air meets the naturally cooler surfaces of a basement or cellar, the stone walls, the concrete floor, it cools rapidly and releases its moisture right there, condensing directly onto those cold surfaces. That's the sweating you see on basement walls in summer. It's not water coming through the walls at all in that case. It's humid air meeting a cold surface and giving up its water on contact. The exact same thing that happens to a glass of ice water sitting on a table in July. My grandmother's answer to this was timing, not machinery. She kept the small cellar windows and the door at the top of the cellar stairs closed during the day, sealed against that warm, humid air, and opened everything for a few hours after sundown, once the outside air had cooled and dried relative to the daytime peak. Warm air in during the day condenses on cold stone. Cool air in during the evening doesn't. It's the same principle as closing curtains against summer sun, just applied to moisture instead of heat. This single habit, timing the airflow instead of fighting it, does more to keep a cellar dry than most people would ever guess. The third source is the one my grandmother actually built her $3 system around, and it's the one most people never think about at all. Residual moisture that's already in the air of an enclosed space, regardless of where it came from. Even with good grading and proper timing, some humidity is always going to be present in a cellar, especially in a climate like ours. This is where passive absorption comes in, and it's the piece that replaces the dehumidifier entirely without using a drop of electricity. Here's exactly what she did, and I want to be specific because vague instructions help nobody. She took large ceramic crocks, the same ones used for pickling and preserving, and filled them roughly 2/3 full with plain, coarse rock salt. Not table salt, the fine kind, coarse rock salt. The same kind sold cheap by the bag at any hardware or farm supply store for road use in winter. Salt is naturally hygroscopic, meaning it pulls moisture directly out of the surrounding air and holds on to it. She placed 3 or 4 of these open crocks in different corners of the cellar, away from foot traffic, and simply left them there. Over the following weeks, the salt visibly draws moisture from the air, clumping and eventually turning slushy at the bottom of the crock as it absorbs. I want to be honest about how this compares to a machine, because I told you from the beginning of this channel I wouldn't oversell anything. A crock of rock salt does not pull moisture from the air as fast or as aggressively as an electric dehumidifier running at full power. It's slower, it's passive, it works over days and weeks, not hours. But here's what it does have going for it that no machine does. It never breaks, it never needs a filter, it never runs up a power bill, and it works exactly as well during a summer storm that knocks the electricity out as it does on a clear, dry day. My grandmother refreshed these crocks roughly once a month during the wettest parts of summer, simply pouring off any accumulated liquid at the bottom and adding fresh salt on top. A 50-pound bag of rock salt, which runs about $8 to $10 at most farm stores, will keep 4 or 5 crocks running for an entire season, which is where that $3 figure comes from when you break it down per crock per month. There's a second material she used alongside the salt in the damper corners, the ones nearest an exterior wall where condensation was heaviest. Plain hardwood charcoal, the unflavored kind, broken into fist-sized chunks and placed in a shallow open basket. Charcoal has a porous structure that also draws moisture from the air, and it carries the added benefit of absorbing odor at the same time, which is part of why a cellar treated this way doesn't carry that heavy, wet basement smell even in the middle of a humid August. She'd set a basket of it near the worst corner and leave it for 2 to 3 months before replacing it, since charcoal saturates more slowly than salt, but holds considerably more moisture before it needs refreshing. Now, here's the honest limitation I need to give you, because I promised I wouldn't skip it. This entire system, the grading, the timed airflow, the salt and charcoal, works extremely well for what I'd call moderate to normal humidity control in a basement or cellar that doesn't have an active water intrusion problem, like a crack letting groundwater directly through. If you've got standing water appearing on your floor after every rain, that's a structural issue that needs to be fixed at the foundation first. No amount of salt in a crock is going to solve actual water entry. This system controls humidity in the air. It does not stop a flood. Know which problem you actually have before you decide this is your answer. The other honest limitation is climate. Here in Ohio, our humidity, while significant in summer, is not the same as what you deal with along the Gulf Coast or in the deep South. In those climates, this system still helps considerably, but you'll likely need more crocks, more frequent refreshing, and possibly some additional ventilation strategy alongside it, rather than relying on passive absorption alone. I'd rather tell you that honestly than have you try this in Louisiana, expecting the exact results I get in Holmes County. So here's what I'd actually ask you to do this week. Not just nod along to. Walk the outside of your own foundation and check the grading. Does the ground slope away from your house, or has it flattened out or even tilted back toward it over the years? That's step one, and it costs nothing but an afternoon and maybe a few wheelbarrows of dirt if it needs correcting. Then, if you've got a musty basement or cellar, pick up a bag of coarse rock salt this week, fill 2 or 3 open containers, and set them in the corners. Give it 3 weeks, and pay attention to whether that heavy, wet smell starts to lift. Tell me in the comments what kind of foundation your house has: stone, block, or poured concrete, and how old your house is, because that changes quite a bit about which of these 3 sources is likely giving you the most trouble. I read every single one, and it genuinely shapes what I decide to cover next on this channel. Next time, I'm going to show you the old method my family has used for generations to keep a chicken coop warm enough through an Ohio winter without a single heat lamp or electric bulb, and why the heat lamp method most people rely on is actually more dangerous than they realize. Go slow this week. Mind where the water wants to go. And remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.